Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hello and welcome to this episode of our program. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle, and today we have with us John Vespasian, who is a published author. Welcome to the program, John.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. So tell us a little bit about your background and what type of books that you write.
Well, I have been writing books about personal development since 2008. So now I have 7 books published. And the 8th book will be coming out in a couple of weeks. And the common thread that goes through the books is the philosophy of rational living, which is a branch of personal development. So basically, the main idea of rational living is that in your private life or business life, you can make much better decisions if you just take a step back and try to look at the facts and try to use logic instead of becoming wildly emotional. And it's very difficult for human beings to stay rational, especially when we are threatened, when we are facing adversity. It's very, very difficult to stay cool, very difficult to make good decisions. And the whole purpose of my work is to analyze really dozens and dozens of cases of people, real people in history, that have made good decisions, that have developed a good career, and also people who have made huge mistakes and try to learn from them.
I love that because I think that we can learn so much from other people's successes as well as failures. And you mentioned a word that I want to pause on because I'm sure that it's obvious to someone like yourself, but I think that sometimes people don't sit. I think we all get too busy and we let things pass us by. But you mentioned the word personal development. Or the 2 words, personal development. Well, the word I want to focus on is development because I think that in our society today, people feel like, give me the magic pill, give me the download, and let me have this thing, whatever this thing is, and let me be about my way. But personal development is not that way because the word development is an action word which gives the connotation that it's continual development. And it's kind of like Tony Robbins teaches with his concept of kanai, constant and never-ending improvement. So can you speak a little bit about the personal development aspect that you write about?
Yes, the whole philosophy of the books is that if you want to make better decisions, it's very difficult to get shortcuts. It's very difficult to get a mind hack that is going to tell you, okay, you take these 3 steps and then you just do A, B, C, and then you're done. This is extremely difficult because sometimes it works if you just hit on the right piece of advice at the right time, but usually it doesn't. Because when you take a person with individual circumstances, I mean, there are so many factors involved, there are so many priorities, so many crisis situations. It's very difficult to apply a simple formula. And the whole idea of my books, personal development in general, but the approach I take is that the only way to really train yourself to make better decisions, to be able to react, I would say, with peace of mind when you're in a crisis situation, is really to go through many, many different cases, to read many, many different stories, to see what people did right, what they did wrong, and to actually develop patterns of thinking that little by little they are going to make you more rational and more effective. And this is very difficult to do in the short time. It takes work. Either you have to read the books or you have to listen to the books, and you have sometimes to do it several times, because until you actually get new patterns of thinking and new patterns of behavior, it's very difficult to improve. Because if you just solve one individual problem, 5 minutes later you will have another problem and the solution might be different. This is why I always place an important emphasis, saying, okay, you have to really develop a rational philosophy. Tricks are not enough.
Yeah, that's really a huge point, and I think that we logically can agree with that. But then, to another point you made earlier, we all, kind of in the moment, we want to be making good decisions, but then in the moment we don't, whatever that decision may be, because I think we just get distracted and caught up in it, and everybody wants that shortcut, and that just doesn't work. So, some of your writings focus on how to become extraordinarily self-confident. Can you speak to the power and the benefit of developing your own self-confidence?
Yes, the approach I take is I have a book titled On Becoming Unbreakable. And what I have in this book is basically to analyze a long number of examples of people who started with very little, who didn't have any special advantage, any special connections or background or anything special. They just started from scratch, and they became extremely self-confident. And the approach I take is really not to promote positive thinking or to promote the law of attraction, which I find, generally speaking, unrealistic, but to actually see the techniques that these people use that can be applied in real life without having to use your energies to make yourself artificially enthusiastic. And let me just give you an example. One of the stories I use in the book is the story of Joseph of Baal, who lived in the 19th century. He died in 1866. And Baal is a story which is not known usually to the English-speaking public, but is well known in Europe. And Baal wrote his autobiography at the end of the 19th century. And it's a very interesting story because he was one of the soldiers that was inducted by Napoleon to fight in the European wars. And actually, he had to quit his job very early in life, and he spent 10 years of his life going to wars in Austria, in Germany, and in the end, he went to Moscow with Russia with Napoleon, and it was a complete disaster because 70% of the French army was killed, and most of the others were taken prisoners. And when Abel was trying to escape, he was going back to Poland. Through Poland, he was captured by the Russians, and he was taken to a prisoner camp in Kazan, 2,000 kilometers east of Moscow. And the story of Abel is how he actually survived in a situation that was completely desperate because, all the French officers were basically dying. They were completely in desperation. They were completely in panic. And Abel was calm all the time. He was trying to escape. He tried to escape 6 times. He escaped actually a couple of times. He was recaptured. He escaped also from starvation because they didn't get any food. So Abel actually found ways to survive. Sometimes staying without food for a week or a couple of weeks. And then he actually managed to, in the end, to go back to Belgium walking because he didn't have any money. So he had to walk basically from Russia to Belgium. It took him several months. And then he rebuilt his life completely. And the story of Abel is fascinating because at that time, all these ideas of positive thinking and law of attraction, they have not been invented. So how did he manage to do that when all the other, basically all the other officers and all the other soldiers of the French army were falling like flies? And it's very interesting to read the book. It's a 19th century book, but it's still full of interesting insights. And what Abel actually, what kept him going, motivated, and actually prevented him from getting into depression and anxiety was that he had heard from veterans from the Napoleon army. He had heard stories of people who had escaped in similar circumstances, people who had survived. Because, wars had been going on in Europe for already 10 years. So Abel actually had talked to many people. He had actually learned what they did to survive. And he actually thought, okay, if they can do it, I can do it too. And on this basis, Abel basically, he just kept going and going and going and going, what all the other people were completely in desperation. And the teaching from the story is that it is much better to try to copy a solution that has been already applied, and it is much better, and it requires much less emotional energy than trying to reinvent the wheel and trying to motivate yourself artificially, trying to say, I'm going to make it. It's much better to copy a plan that works, as was done by Joseph Abel, because then he didn't have to waste his time trying to motivate himself. He was just going and going and going because he had a plan.
Well, I would submit to you that not only did he have a plan, but he had a plan and then took action on it. Because too many times people are kind of looking back at that statement, knowledge is power, is really a fallacy, because knowledge is only the potential power. You have to put that knowledge into action. So yes, he had a plan, but then he took action on it. And you can't take action without a plan, because then you're running around in circles, and you can't have a plan without action, because then it does no good. So that makes a whole lot of sense.
Yes, another strategy that I present in this book, and this is super important when you're conducting any kind of business or any kind of sales activity, is how to actually overcome negative criticism and rejection, which is really a huge factor in failure, because people eventually, if they get rejected all the time and they get criticized, eventually they give up. And this is a huge factor. Psychologically, it can be a killer if you're getting negatively criticized all the time. But still, in some professions and in some kind of business, it's inevitable, because you're playing the odds that are very thin. And if you want to succeed in some kind of professions and businesses, you really have to push very hard. And I tell the story in the book of William Turner, who was a painter in the 19th century in Britain. He died in 1851. And Turner, he was very successful in the end. He got very wealthy and actually very famous. But all his life, he was savagely criticized by the newspapers. He was an innovator in painting. He was the first impressionist in history, 50 years ahead of the French impressionists. But he did not get accolades from the newspapers. The only hit he got was actually criticisms. He was told repeatedly he could not draw. He could not do anything creative. He was also a very shy personality. He had problems with public speaking. I mean, he was not really the winner, as you can imagine today, a winner when you see someone in the media. But eventually, Turner, even if he was continuously criticized, continuously trashed by the newspapers, he figured out how to overcome the problem. Now, you have to realize that in the context of the 19th century, the newspapers were extremely powerful, because he was basically the only media. I mean, you had all the London newspapers against you. It was very, very, very difficult to be successful as an artist. And Turner managed to do that. And at a certain point, his strategy was he just ignored the newspapers. At the beginning, he tried to argue with journalists. He tried to explain his theories about painting, about art, but he was completely misunderstood. So eventually, he gave up. He concentrated on his work. And he tried to become extremely efficient, because he didn't waste any time anymore trying to argue with people. Say, okay, if you don't like my stuff, that's too bad for you. I will just focus on the small part of the market who really likes my work. And he concentrated on his work. He became very much withdrawn from society, and he started to produce paintings at a speed that it was unknown in history. At a certain point, he was producing 3 paintings per day. And the way he did it, and this I explain very much in detail in the book, he actually by using his weaknesses, which was also, I would say, in the field of personal development, something which is very interesting. Because Turner he didn't have any creativity. He was unable to produce original compositions. He didn't have any ideas, but he was very good with colors, and he was very good at drawing. And what he did was to actually acknowledge his weakness and said, okay, I cannot find new ideas, so I'm just going to find them outside. So he would take every single year, he would take a sketchbook and a few pencils, and he would just walk around Europe, actually walk, because he didn't have a lot of money. He would just take a carriage with a horse, or he would walk, and he would just go and make sketches of churches, mountains, rivers, monasteries, cathedrals. And he would spend the whole summer walking around in Belgium, in Switzerland, in Germany, also in Wales, in Scotland. And then he went back to London in September, and he spent the whole autumn and winter producing paintings on the basis of the sketches. And he became the most productive artist in history. By the time he died, he left more than 2,000 sketches of paintings he wanted to produce. So in the end, he became extremely wealthy. He became extremely successful, despite being continuously criticized by newspapers just because he decided to ignore it, to ignore the criticism, and to become extremely productive in his work.
Yeah, that's quite the example of being just unbreakable and confident and consistent. And I think that too many times we find in our lives, in fact, I follow Darren Hardy, who's the publisher of Success Magazine, and I know he recently wrote a book, I believe it's called The Entrepreneur Roller Coaster, and the concept is you're going to come up with an entrepreneurial business idea and be all gung-ho about it and tell this person and that person and family and friends, and as soon as one or two people mention something negative, you drop it. Well, that's not the case. They don't know what you know, and it's exactly the same with your example there. And a couple of the examples you're giving are from, like world leaders and people that are making large contributions. What about someone, I know you write about Buffalo Bill. Can you speak about his kind of self-confidence and being unbreakable as well?
Well, he was unbreakable most of the time. And the story I analyze in the book, Buffalo Bill, is a very interesting example because at a certain point he made huge financial mistakes. He was a very successful showman. He had a Western show. He was touring Europe. He was in London, in Paris, in Vienna, and then he was touring also the United States. At a certain point, he made huge mistakes financially. He had too many people on his staff. Then he had an accident because he was traveling. At a certain point, he was traveling by rail, and there was a wreck, and some people were injured. Some of his performers, sharpshooters, they were injured. He lost 50% of the horses. So basically, it was a mess. And then he had a lot of competition because Buffalo Bill was the most famous Western showman, but there were a lot of competitors around. So by the turn of the century, he died in 1917. By the turn of the century, he was basically bankrupt. He kept going a little bit for a few years, but eventually he had to face bankruptcy and he would lose everything he had. And he made a lot of money in the meantime, but he made stupid investments because he invested in a gold mine that had no gold. He bought some cattle, and then the price fell down. He bought a hotel that stayed empty most of the time. I mean, he made completely horrible investments. So basically, he lost everything. And when he was already quite old, he was almost 70, he had to face bankruptcy. He had no savings. He had no job. It was a horrible situation. And the whole point, the story I tell in my book, is how he could actually face the situation, and in the end he came out a winner because he was a very, very philosophical man, very calm. He had faced a lot of problems in his life. I mean, he had been in the wars with the Indians, and eventually he said, "Look, maybe I lose everything, but if I play the whole situation with a cool head, maybe I can get out of it." And that's the whole point of the story. And eventually, Buffalo Bill went to his creditors and said, "Look, if you force me to file for bankruptcy, you will lose everything. You don't get anything back. But if you keep the business going, I can transfer the shares to you so you can own the business. But if you keep me as the top star and you keep paying me, it will be more successful." So eventually, he transferred his business to his creditors. He gave them all the shares, but he would still kept working, and he would appear every show for half an hour. At the beginning, the show was still called the Buffalo Bill Show. Even if he was 70, 73, 74, he was still working. He was still earning a good income, and he actually rebuilt his life completely financially after his 70s. So the story is fascinating because you see someone facing truly extraordinary adversity and remaining very, very cool and trying to find the solution, and eventually he found it.
Hmm. And again, I'm a wordsmith, so I love focusing on words that some people gloss over. Eventually is a really neat word in what you just said, because it wasn't the first try and he hit it big, or it wasn't the first try and it didn't work, so he quit. He did it and did it and did it, and then eventually it worked out. And you see some of these people, and I know you're familiar with this phrase too, of, the overnight success. Well, the overnight success, is like the tip of the iceberg. The success is the tip, but the part people don't see is the 10 or 15 years of hard work and failure, and eventually that overnight success happens. Well, the overnight is just when one of those failed ideas finally does take root and pay off. So, boy, I've just enjoyed learning about your writings and interesting stories. Where can people learn more about your books and stories and find more about you?
Well, it's very easy to find me. If you type my name, John Vespasian, on Google, you will find my website, my blog. It has hundreds of free articles. The books are available as electronic books. They're available as paper books. They're available very soon also as audiobooks in English. And you can find it very easy by typing John Vespasian on Google. And you will find also in my blog, you will find also my free newsletter that I publish most of the time weekly or fortnightly, and it will keep you informed of new developments.
Excellent. Well, John, thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful getting to know you today.
Many thanks, Mike. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.